Good morning, welcome to this morning's video. Today we have a feeding story from Matthew's Gospel. It's Matthew 14 verses 13 through to 21, and it's the well-known story of the feeding of the 5,000. It goes like this. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and he healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. Give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said, and he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. He then gave them to the disciples, and the disciples then gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and also children. So here you've got that feeding story, and we've all got a feeding story. It might be a time where we've had a church bring and share, or it might be a family do where people have gathered around a special meal to share fellowship together. Eating together builds community. We've all got a funny story as well about food, or the times we've at least wanted to eat food. My funny story involves my lovely but deceased Labrador Willow, who died recently. He could eat absolutely anything, as is the Labrador's ways. And one day he managed to get a full big turkey off the side in the kitchen. It was cooked, and he ate the lot in one go. Bones, skin, meat, even the string. He ate the lot. And it's at this point I need to stop that story. I'm sure you can guess what happened next. But we still talk about that every time we have turkey. We remember the time when. So we've all got stories. And feeding stories were very much part of early Jewish life, early Christian life, and feeding stories and food all over the place in our scriptures. So many stories. I'm sure you can bring some to the forefront of your minds right now. So I want us to look at this story and see what we can pull out of it for today. Now, as you can imagine, there's just been so much work done on this wonderful miracle. So I'm just going to share just some thoughts with you today, which you might find useful. Who knows? The first thing I want to bring out of this story is what jumps out to me. And it's not in any order, but for me, it's this wonderful line where it says, "And he directed the people to sit down on the grass." If you were going on a picnic and you were sitting down on the grass, what's the first thing you'd do? You'd check that grass to see whether it was damp, to see whether you were going to get a wet bum or not. And I've just got this picture of all these people before they're sitting down to check, just checking the grass, checking that it's okay to sit on, and also checking they're not sitting in anything they'd rather not be sitting in. I don't know why, but it just struck me this morning. It's great when scripture does that. We notice all of a sudden a line that we've maybe never noticed before. What jumps out to you today about this story? Keep on reading it and just see what the Lord's saying to you. When I read that, I just had this big smile on my face because it reminded me of the week before when we'd sat outside in our back garden and we'd sat on the grass to have just a little picnic at home. The first thing we did was feel the lawn. So what can we pull out of this passage? Well, first of all, let's think about the emotions of Jesus. It starts when Jesus heard what had happened. So we need to know what happened. Well, what happened was John the Baptist was executed in a horrific, horrific way. And Jesus finds out his cousin has been murdered. And he is just full of grief and trauma and loss. And, you know, if we experience sadness and grief, quite often we want to be on our own. We want to get away. We need to just be somewhere quiet to get our heads around what's happened. And this is what Jesus does. Jesus hears of his cousin's death. And not only that, but he's been rejected as well. He's been rejected from his hometown. So he's got things going on in his life. And yet, despite all of that, even with that emotion, he looks and he sees what he can do to help others. He's not putting his needs first, he's putting the needs of others. And we've got this word compassion. Now, Greek scholars get very excited about the translation of that word. It actually means something far more than compassion. It's kind of a gut-wrenching response to need. Much more than compassion. It's got action, it's got power, it's got pain in it as well. So even though Jesus is expressing his emotions, even though Jesus is in a really bad place himself emotionally, he sees the needs of others. He has compassion and he heals their sick. That is just so powerful a statement, isn't it? Even on its own. What else can we see from this passage? Well, there's all sorts, but I want us to bring out this idea of eating together, unifying people. Jesus has been away. He's been away. He's still grieving, but he comes back and he's got people all around him and he starts to build community. You can build community when people start to eat together. If people eat together, they'll talk together. When people talk together, they learn from one another. When people learn from one another, they gain trust. Jesus is here and he's building a community around him. It's absolutely amazing. We've got the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke. They all bring this feeding story into their gospels. They're called synoptic because they're very similar. John is a standalone gospel because it's written very differently and there's lots of pictures and images and symbols. So we've got Matthew, Mark and Luke. Now, each of them make this transition from the very beginning, this death, the death of John, to this miracle in different ways. And for me, what's really interesting is Mark and Luke disconnect the death of John and this miracle, but Matthew connects it together. He connects grief, absolute tragedy, with provision and feeding and building community. And it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, one of the things that's really struck me over this pandemic time is people have had funerals of which maybe they've only been able to have 10 people present with them. It's been very hard. Numerous people haven't been with their loved ones when they've died. And they've not only not been able to have a service that they'd want with lots of people there, but they've not been able to have the gathering afterwards. The part afterwards where people literally go to be fed, go to share, go to tell stories, go to show that life mattered and always will matter. That's been taken away from people. I understand now that the crematorium will now have 30 people there, and now families are able to have what used to be called a wake a long time ago, but gatherings after. Why? Because building community when you're in pain with grief matters. Sharing together really matters. So eating together unites people, and Matthew connects devastation and loss with miracle and feeding. Another point I want to bring out is that Jesus is moving from being a teacher to a miracle worker. Now, some scholars have tried to minimise the power of Jesus, the power of God in the miracles. So you get arguments which basically say it wasn't so much about a miracle. The miracle was everybody just shared what they'd already got. So, yeah, no doubt that sharing took place, but let's not minimise the power of God in this story. Let's not take that away. It's actually crucial, the power that Jesus has to bring people together just by the simplest of actions. 5 loaves and 2 fish. Absolutely amazing. Let's never diminish the power of Christ Jesus. The other thing we can bring out of this is there's almost an echo of communion in there. Jesus is lifting up the loaves, he's giving thanks, he's breaking them. Once again, reminding us that it's in kind of that sharing, that communion, that we are made one. And that crowd, that group of all those different individuals, something happened which joined them all together. And I think that is so powerful. I want to close by just really thinking about a God who feels and a God who feeds. For me, I'm so bad when it comes to food. If I have a bad day, I find myself having a Big Mac. Bad day equals Big Mac. My diet has not gone well. I'm always on a diet and I'm just really undisciplined when it comes to food. And I love chocolate, especially Maltesers. There's so much in the media, isn't there now? Boris Johnson wants us all to get on a diet. See how that one goes. Adverts for bog-offs, buy one, get one free. If it's on junk food, it's going. And apparently there's not going to be any junk food adverts until after 9 o'clock. So we've got kind of a narrative out there at the minute, which is to do with food and provision of food and how we need to feed ourselves so that we can be well or better. Now, you might want to draw some parallels. There is a God who feeds us and a God who feels. Let's not take away the physical aspect of feeding the hungry in this story, but feeding them something that they needed and the healing that took place around that time too. I think we've all got to take ourselves, our bodies, our lives, spiritually as well as physically. We've just got to take our discipleship so much more seriously, haven't we? We've got to be more disciplined, not just in the matters of the spirit and the soul. And maybe next time I have a bad day, rather than having a Big Mac and a box or 2 of Maltesers, maybe I need to just get on my knees and just thank God, the God who feeds us properly and the God who feels our experiences. So I don't know what this will all mean to you. It's all a bit muddled, I suppose, jumbled, but they were my thoughts on today's passage. I hope they've helped you in some way. And I do pray that you have a really, really, really good day. And I'm going to try and keep off the Maltesers. Take care, everyone. God bless.